The moment I walked into the tasting room, I smelled it. Not the oak barrels or the crushed grapes, but the distinct scent of arrogance. The Crimson Valley estate was packed. Crystal flutes clinked, laughter echoed off the vaulted ceilings, and somewhere in the center of it all stood Olivia, my brother's perfect fiancée, holding court like she owned the place. I stood near the entrance, brushing a speck of dust from my jeans. I bad come straight from the lower vineyards, checking the soil pH before the harvest. My boots were scuffed. My hair was pulled back in a messy knot. To anyone in this room, I looked like the help. Olivia spotted me first. She leaned toward her cluster of bridesmaids, covering her mouth with a manicured hand, but she made sure her whisper was loud enough to carry across the room. "Oh, great, the mud girl is here." She wrinkled her nose, performing disgust for her audience. "She smells like cheap fertilizer." Her friends giggled, clutching their champagne glasses. Olivia didn't even bother to look at me when she said it. I was that insignificant to her. Just some embarrassment that crawled out of the dirt to ruin the aesthetic of her perfect engagement party. I didn't flinch. I didn't look down at my boots in shame. I just watched her take a sip of the red wine in her glass. It was a 2018 Bloodline Cabernet, my vintage. What Olivia didn't know, what nobody in this room knew, was that the wine she was drinking, the hand-blown glass she was holding, and every square inch of the limestone floor beneath her overpriced heels belonged to me. I signed the deed to this estate 3 years ago, and by the end of tonight, that whisper was going to cost her everything she ever wanted. Before we watch this house of cards come crashing down, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one, and I'd love to know who's part of our community. I left the noise of the ballroom behind and stepped out onto the terrace. The night air was cool, carrying the mineral scent of the soil, the terroir that made this valley famous. Olivia called me the mud girl like it was an insult, but she didn't understand that mud was the only honest thing in this family. I walked to the edge of the stone railing, looking out over the rows of vines stretching into the darkness. I knew every acre. I knew which rows struggled with drainage and which ones produced the award-winning grapes. I knew this land because I had bled into it, while my brother Tyler had only ever walked on it to take selfies. 12 years ago, I stood in this exact spot, but it looked different then. It was a failing farm, and I was 19. That was the day I learned exactly what I was worth to my parents. Tyler had gotten into a prestigious fraternity at college, and the dues were $4,000. My parents didn't have the cash, so, without asking me, without even a conversation, they sold whiskey. He was my horse, a quarter-horse gelding I had raised from a foal. He was the only living thing in that house that didn't look at me with disappointment. They sold him to a riding school 3 counties over. When I found the empty stall, my mother didn't apologize. She just said, "Tyler needs connections, Haley. You need to be realistic about our priorities." I didn't waste energy on tears. You don't cry when the drought comes. You just dig deeper. I packed a bag that night and left. I didn't go to college. I went to the vineyards down the road. I became a cellar rat. I scraped tartrate crystals off the insides of fermentation tanks until my hands were raw. I hauled hoses, cleaned presses, and learned the chemistry of fermentation while Tyler was partying on my horse's dime. I saved every cent. When the market crashed 5 years ago, and land prices plummeted, I bought the first 10 acres of what would become the Crimson Valley estate. Nobody paid attention. To them, I was just labor. But there is a secret ledger in this family, a balance sheet that only I can see. For the last 4 years, my parents have been drowning in debt. They live in a house they cannot afford, driving cars they cannot maintain, all to keep up appearances for people like the Whitmores. And for the last 4 years, on the 1st of every month, I have sent an anonymous cashier's check for $2,400 to their mailbox. I didn't do it out of love. I did it because it was an operating expense, a tax I paid to keep them solvent so I wouldn't have to watch them starve. It was the price of my own peace. But here is the part that makes the bile rise in my throat. They think the money comes from Tyler. I have heard my mother bragging on the phone, talking about Tyler's investments and how he takes such good care of them. Tyler, who hasn't held a steady job in 6 years, never corrects them. He takes the credit for my labor, just like he took the price of my horse. I took a sip of my wine. It was complex, with a bitter finish. Tonight, the invisible ledger was finally going to be balanced. They thought they were celebrating a merger of dynasties. They didn't realize they were standing on land owned by the daughter they sold out, drinking wine paid for by the horse they stole, and the bill was finally coming due. The ballroom was starting to feel suffocating, a perfumed cage of lies and ambition. I needed to check my inventory. That was the excuse I gave myself. But the truth was I needed to be surrounded by things that were real oak, glass, fermentation. I slipped away from the terrace and headed toward the main cellar door, keying in the code that only the senior staff and I knew. The heavy door hissed open, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees. I breathed in the scent of aging wine and finally relaxed. The cellar was a labyrinth of barrels stacked floor to ceiling, shadows stretching long in the dim security lighting. I walked down the center aisle, running my hand along the French oak. This was my sanctuary, but as I turned the corner toward the reserve section, I heard a voice. It was hushed, frantic, and coming from the tasting alcove at the far end. I froze. I knew that voice. It was Richard, Olivia's father, the man currently upstairs playing the role of the benevolent patriarch. "I don't care what the interest rate is," Richard hissed. I crept closer, staying in the shadows of a large fermentation tank. "We need the cash by Monday morning. If that wire doesn't clear, the whole thing implodes." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. Richard paced, his silhouette cutting back and forth across the dim light. "No, you listen to me. The Burns family equity is our exit strategy. The son is an idiot, but the assets are there. Once the marriage license is signed, we leverage their holdings to cover the shortfalls in the Arizona fund." I felt my blood turn to ice. The Burns family equity. He wasn't talking about Tyler's non-existent portfolio. He was talking about my parents' house. My parents, who had refinanced their mortgage 3 times just to keep up appearances. Richard thought they were sitting on a gold mine, and he was planning to mine it dry before the honeymoon was over. "We just need to get through the toasts," Richard said, his voice dropping lower. "Keep the investors calm for 2 more hours. Tell them the merger is happening. Tell them the liquidity is secured." He hung up and leaned against a wine rack, exhaling a long, shaky breath. In that moment, the mask slipped completely. He didn't look like a wealthy businessman. He looked like a cornered animal. He looked like a man who knew the walls were closing in. I waited until he left the cellar, heading back up to the party to resume his performance. My hands were trembling, but my mind was racing. They were broke. Not just cash poor, but catastrophically, criminally broke. And they were using my family as a life raft. I needed proof. Hard proof. I walked to the small office at the back of the cellar where we kept the venue contracts. I logged into the system and pulled up the file for the Whitmore Burns wedding. The venue fee was $900,000. It had been marked as pending wire transfer for 3 weeks. But when I clicked into the collateral documents, I found it. A lien. A lien against my parents' property, signed and notarized, guaranteeing the venue costs in case of default. I stared at the signatures at the bottom. Stephanie Burns, Robert Burns. The handwriting was a perfect imitation of my parents, but I knew for a fact they hadn't signed this. They didn't even know this document existed. It was a forgery. A clumsy, desperate forgery designed to buy time. Richard wasn't just a con man. He was sloppy. He was betting everything on the fact that nobody would check the paperwork until it was too late. He was betting on our stupidity. He had no idea he was betting against the house. And the house always wins. I left the cellar, the proof burning a hole in my pocket. I needed to find Tyler. Not to accuse him, but to warn him. As much as he had failed me, I couldn't let him walk into a marriage that was essentially a financial hostage situation. I found him near the bar, laughing with a group of his fraternity brothers. He looked flushed, happy, and completely oblivious. "Tyler," I said, pulling him away from his friends, "we need to talk." now," he groaned, rolling his eyes. "Can you not be dramatic for one night?" "It's my engagement party, Haley. Just let me enjoy it. This isn't drama. It's about Richard and Olivia." I overheard Richard on the phone. "They're broke. Tyler. They're using this wedding to cover massive debts." Tyler stared at me, then burst out laughing. "You are unbelievable. You're actually jealous, aren't you? You can't stand that I'm marrying into a family with class, so you have to make up some insane story to ruin it." "I'm not making it up. I saw the paperwork. There's a lien on Mom and Dad's house." "Stop it," he hissed, his face twisting with ugly anger. "Just stop. You've always been bitter because you had to work in the dirt while I had a life, but don't you dare try to stain the only pure thing in this family with your paranoia. Stay away from Olivia. Stay away from me, or I swear I'll have security throw you out." He shoved past me, heading back to the bar. I stood there, the rejection stinging more than I expected. I had tried. I had given him the chance to be a victim instead of an accomplice. He had made his choice. I turned to leave, needing air. But the door to the ladies' lounge opened, and Olivia stepped out. She blocked my path, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Trouble in paradise?" she asked, her voice silky. "Cut the act, Olivia. Or should I call you Sandra? I know about Arizona." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes went dead. She stepped closer, invading my space, smelling of expensive perfume and desperation. "You think you're clever, don't you? The little farm girl playing detective." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Let me explain how the world works, Haley. People believe what they want to believe. Your parents want to believe they are marrying into royalty. Tyler wants to believe he's a golden boy. And me? I believe I deserve this life. I deserve the wine, the estate, the money. I'm not stealing it. I'm claiming it." I studied her like a vine infested with rot. I realized something terrifying. She wasn't lying to me. She believed her own con. In her mind, the theft wasn't a crime. It was a correction of the universe's mistake in not making her rich. She had convinced herself so thoroughly of her own entitlement that the truth had simply ceased to exist for her. That kind of delusion is bulletproof. You can't reason with it. You can only destroy it. "Stay out of my way," she hissed, her nails digging into my arm. "Or I'll make sure your parents cut you off for good. I'll make sure you never see a dime of this family's wealth again." She pushed past me, heading back to the ballroom to play the blushing bride. I watched her go, rubbing the spot where her nails had marked my skin. She thought she was threatening a poor girl terrified of losing her allowance. She had no idea she had just declared war on the landlord. I watched Olivia disappear into the crowd, her white dress swishing like a flag of surrender she didn't know she was waving. My hands stopped shaking. The anger that had been burning in my chest for the last hour didn't vanish. It solidified. It cooled into something hard and heavy, like a stone in my gut. I realized then that I had made a mistake. I had been trying to handle this like a family member, like a sister trying to save her brother from a bad decision. But this wasn't a family dispute. It was a hostile takeover. And I wasn't a sister anymore. I was a CEO. I caught the eye of Matthew, my estate manager and head sommelier. He was standing by the reserve bar, decanting a magnum of vintage Merlot. He had been with me since I bought the first 10 acres of mud. He knew the look on my face. He set the decanter down, adjusted his tie, and gave me a single, sharp nod. We met in the executive office behind the tasting room. The sound of the party was muffled here, reduced to a dull thrum of bass and laughter. It was quiet. It was professional. It was the only place on the estate where I felt completely in control. "They're moving to the toasts in 20 minutes, Matthew said, unlocking the main server. "The projection system is prepped. Do we proceed?" "Not yet," I said. "Get Rebecca on the line." Rebecca was my corporate attorney, a woman who billed $600 an hour and was worth every penny. She answered on the first ring. I put her on speaker. "Tell me you have it," I said. "We have it." Rebecca's voice was crisp. My forensic accountant just finished tracing the shell companies. Richard Whitmore isn't just broke, Haley. He's selling air. The Arizona Reserve he keeps leveraging? It doesn't exist. We sent a private investigator to the address of his warehouse. It's a self-storage unit outside Phoenix containing 40 cases of 2-buck chuck and a lot of dust. It's a classic Ponzi structure. He's using new investors to pay off the old ones, and the wedding gifts are his liquidity event. And the lien? I asked. It's valid, Rebecca confirmed. The signatures are forged, obviously, but the holding company that financed the wedding overages doesn't know that. To them, it's a secured debt against your parents' home. If Richard defaults on the wedding bill, which he will, the holding company forecloses on your parents. I looked at the venue contract on my screen. The outstanding balance for the sovereign package was huge, but the debt note, the lien on my parents' house, was valued at $150,000. Buy it, I said. Excuse me? The debt note. Call the holding company. Offer them full face value for the lien. Effective immediately. I want to be the holder of that debt. Haley, Rebecca warned. That's a lot of cash to burn on a toxic asset. I'm not burning it. I'm investing in leverage. Wire the funds. $150,000. Do it now. I waited. The silence in the office was thick. I watched the seconds tick by on the digital clock. 1 minute, 2. Then, my computer chimed. A transfer notification. Transaction complete. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the shift in the universe. 10 minutes ago, I was a helpless daughter watching her parents get fleeced. Now, I was the bank. I legally owned the debt that was hanging over their heads. I held the deed to their survival in my digital wallet. Richard thought he was playing a high-stakes game of poker with my family's future. He didn't realize he was sitting at a table where I owned the deck, the chips, and the building. I stood up and smoothed the front of my jeans. Okay, Matthew, I said, my voice flat. I returned to the ballroom just as the lights dimmed. The spotlight hit the center stage, illuminating Richard Whitmore. He held a glass of my 2018 Bloodline Cabernet in his hand, swirling it with the practiced ease of a man who didn't know he was drinking his own execution. The crowd hushed. My parents stood near the front, beaming, desperate to believe that this moment was their salvation. To family, Richard boomed, his voice amplified by the expensive sound system I had paid for. Tonight isn't just about a wedding. It's about legacy. It's about merging two great houses. He gestured to my parents, who looked like they might faint from the flattery. I am thrilled to announce that Tyler and I will be launching a new venture next month, the Phoenix Equity Fund, a chance to build generational wealth for everyone in this room. A ripple of polite applause went through the crowd. Investors reached for their checkbooks. Tyler puffed out his chest, looking important. Olivia stood beside him, clutching her bouquet like a shield, her eyes scanning the room nervously. I stood in the shadows near the AV booth. Matthew was inside, his finger hovering over the enter key. I caught his eye through the glass. I didn't smile. I didn't hesitate. I just gave a single, sharp nod. Behind Richard, the massive projection screen flickered. The slideshow of Tyler and Olivia's staged beach photos vanished. The music cut out abruptly, leaving only the hum of the air conditioning. A new image appeared. It wasn't a photo. It was a satellite map, high resolution. The timestamp was from yesterday. The location tag read, Whitmore, Arizona Reserve Vineyard. The crowd squinted. There were no vines. There was no winery. There was just a patch of dry, cracked dirt and a rusted chain-link fence surrounding a self-storage facility. Richard stopped mid-sentence. He turned slowly, the wine glass trembling in his hand. Before he could speak, the image changed again. This time, it was a document. The lien. It was blown up to 10 feet tall, crisp and damning. The clause leveraging my parents' home was highlighted in red. At the bottom, the signatures of Stephanie and Robert Burns were zoomed in. Next to them, A forensic handwriting analysis report stamped forgery detected. A gasp tore through the room. My mother put a hand to her mouth. Tyler took a step back from Olivia, his face draining of color. Then came the kill shot. The screen flashed a mugshot. It was 3 years old, taken in Maricopa County. The woman in the photo had darker hair and less makeup, but the cold, dead eyes were unmistakable. The name under the booking number wasn't Olivia Whitmore. It was Sandra Williams. Charges: wire fraud, identity theft, grand larceny. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a building collapses. Richard stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. Olivia, or Sandra, looked ready to bolt, but she was trapped in the center of the dance floor by the weight of 300 staring eyes. I stepped out of the shadows. I didn't yell. The sound echoed through the room, sharp and clear. "I'm afraid that vintage is corked, Richard," I said, my voice calm, almost bored. "Just like your assets." The double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. It wasn't caterers. It was Agent Reeves and a tactical team from the FBI, moving with the precision of a sledgehammer. "Richard Whitmore, alias Richard Weaver," Reeves shouted, her badge flashing in the spotlight. "Step away from the guests. You are under arrest." Richard dropped the wine glass. It shattered on the floor, splashing red wine across his shoes like blood. He didn't run. He just slumped, the air going out of him instantly. Olivia tried to push through the crowd, screaming that it was a mistake, that I was a liar, but 2 officers intercepted her before she made it 5 feet. As they handcuffed her, she looked back at me, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. I didn't look away. I took a sip of my own wine and watched them drag the trash out of my house. The police lights faded down the long driveway, taking the Whitmores and their delusions with them. But inside the ballroom, the silence was broken by a different kind of panic. My mother, Stephanie, had finally processed what she saw on the screen before it went dark. She was clutching Tyler's arm, her face gray with shock. "The lien," she gasped, her voice rising to a shriek that cut through the murmurs of the remaining guests. "Richard leveraged the house. It's in the contract. If he defaults..." "Oh my God. We're homeless. Tyler, do something. We're going to lose everything." Tyler looked around wildly, pale and sweating. "I don't know what to do, Mom. I didn't sign anything." "They forged it," she screamed. "But the holding company won't care. They'll evict us before we can prove it. We're ruined." I watched them from the edge of the stage. For years, I had watched them preen and posture, pretending to be the lords of a manor they couldn't afford. Now, stripped of their pretenses, they looked small, fragile. Matthew stepped forward, holding a sleek black folder. "Excuse me, Mrs. Burns." His voice was calm, projecting authority. "You won't be losing your house tonight." Stephanie stared at him, blinking tears away. "What? Who are you?" "I am the estate manager," Matthew said. "And I have been instructed to inform you that the debt note regarding your property was purchased 20 minutes ago from the holding company." "Purchased?" Tyler stammered. "By who?" "By the owner of the Crimson Valley estate." Matthew turned and gestured to me. The room seemed to tilt. My mother looked at me, then at the vineyards visible through the glass walls, then back at me. Her brain was trying to reconcile the daughter she sold out for horse money with the woman standing before her, the woman who owned the ground beneath her feet. "Haley?" she whispered. You own this?" I walked down the steps of the stage. The crowd parted for me. I stopped in front of my family. I held the original debt note in my hand. It was a piece of paper worth $150,000. It was the deed to their survival. "I started as a cellar rat," I said, my voice low and steady. "I worked 18-hour days while you were bragging about Tyler's imaginary investments. I built this place from the dirt up, and for the last 4 years, I'm the one who has been paying your mortgage. Not Tyler. Me." Tyler flinched as if I'd slapped him. My mother covered her mouth, a sob escaping her throat. I looked down at the document in my hand. I could keep it. I could hold it over them forever. I could evict them tomorrow and watch them scramble. That would be revenge. But standing there, looking at their terrified faces, I realized something. Revenge is messy. It requires you to get down in the mud with the people who hurt you. Justice is different. Justice is absolute. I wasn't saving them because I loved them. I wasn't saving them because I forgave them. I was saving them because that is what a sovereign does. A sovereign provides, even to the ungrateful. By saving them, I was proving once and for all that I never needed them, but they would always, desperately, need me. I ripped the debt note in half. The sound was loud in the quiet room. Then I ripped it again, and again, until it was just confetti in my hand. "You're safe," I said coldly. "Go home. Don't come back here until you understand exactly who I am." The paper fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. I didn't wait for a thank you. Sovereigns don't ask for gratitude from their subjects. I turned my back on them and walked out the double doors, stepping onto the terrace. The vineyard was quiet, bathed in moonlight. The vines didn't care about status or lies. They only cared about the work. I took a deep breath of the cool night air, smelling the soil, the grapes, and the future. I was the mud girl, and I was the queen. Sometimes the best revenge isn't watching them burn, but showing them you built the fire they're using to keep warm. If you've ever had to be the bigger person for people who made you feel small, share this story, and don't forget to follow for more.